Thank you very much. I'm very excited to be here. And today I'm going to talk about how increased digital scrutiny by the public, and by that I mean the use of digital technologies such as smartphones and social media platforms to scrutinize organizations and its workers. When does it lead to negative outcomes? What are the underlying processes and the boundary conditions? So that's what is going to be the focus of this talk. So let me jump right into the empirical puzzle, where existing research has shown that increased digital scrutiny by the public leads to improved organizational accountability. And by organizational accountability, I mean patterns of how organizations implement policies and practices in response to stakeholder demands. Studies done in the hospitality and the hotel industry have shown that organizations do care about like scrutiny by the public. They read the reviews, they respond, they take a line of action and improve. So that's what we know. But in my empirical setting, which I'll talk about shortly, I find that increased digital scrutiny by the public can also, like to demand more accountability from organizations, can also worsen accountability paradoxically. And I try to unpack when can we expect this to happen, what are the boundary conditions, what are the underlying processes. So when I go to the literature on accountability, they have identified several mechanisms on when accountability mechanisms such as random audits and stakeholder reports lead to positive outcomes. But then they haven't really looked at public enforcing, demanding accountability through these platforms. A lot of the work is focused on managerial accountability or shareholders demanding accountability, not so much on the public. And secondly, existing work has looked at the mechanisms and what the outcomes are, not looking at the intermediate process. In a sense, if an organization implements a change initiative in response to stakeholder demands, there needs to be somebody implementing that, taking a line of action, seeing that through. And existing work hasn't really focused on that. And specifically, the role played by frontline professionals. These are your service desk employees, your call center workers who actually interact with the public and the customers, take a line of action, and implement accountability. How do those professionals respond when there is increased scrutiny, when there is a scandal unfolding through social media? How do they respond? And does that, in some sense, my intuition is, does that connect to like unpacking that puzzle, right? So that's essentially my research question. How do frontline professionals respond to increased public scrutiny by the digital scrutiny, and with what consequences, right? Why should we care? Like, as we know, the last few years, number of scandals, increased scrutiny by the public. Firms such as United Airlines and Yelp, and even large firms, they have confronted this, and this has like performance implications because they lose their reputation, and that has like costs. So that's why we should care, understand how do organizations react, how should they react, what changes they need to implement. So that's the motivation. My research context is slightly different. It's not regular for-profit firms. I look at 911 emergency management organizations as an extreme case. These are the organizations that take the 911 calls, evaluate whether it's an emergency or not, and send a response. The reason is such scandals and increased scrutiny happens a whole lot in these settings, and it acts as a strategic research site for me to isolate those incidents, see how employees react before and after scandal and so forth. So that's why I choose this setting. And the research approach is unfolded in three phases. First, an in-depth ethnography of one organization, which I'll call as DEMO, Delta Emergency Management Organization. It's a pseudonym. Then I did a comparative study of 7 other organizations, 7 other EMOs, to see how much of these issues generalize, and then to look at the actual implementation of an intervention to see can organizations overcome those problems. I did a matched case design of 2 organizations which are structurally similar, follow the same process, to see what intervention worked. So that's the design. Data sources, primarily observations and interviews, looking at how the frontline employees, in this case, the call takers, how do they respond when a scandal about the organization unfolds before and after. In addition to qualitative data observations and interviews, I also used quantitative data, 911 call logs is a repeated cross-section data of 5 million calls over years to see the changes in categorization pattern of the frontline employees before and after like a scandal unfolds. So that's the approach. I'll spend a minute here because this is important, and I'll come back to this. This is the coordination workflow followed in this organization. A 911 call can be made through a mobile phone or landline, and the first person who takes the call is the 911 call taker, who is the frontline professional in this context. And that person evaluates the call, find out if the call is a real emergency or not, what is the priority level, assigns that, and sends it to the next person in the coordination chain, who are the dispatchers. The dispatchers find out who are the nearest first responders on the scene, coordinate with them. So the important point here is it's a multi-stage sequential coordination process. There's at least like 2 stages, the call takers, dispatchers, and then the first responders, right? So I'll summarize my main findings. My question was, why do we see this puzzle where like public criticizing, scrutinizing, we see like decreased accountability, the response time goes up. So I'll start with the boundary conditions. So in organizations that involve multi-stage sequential coordination, what I showed before, and when the frontline professional, in this case the call takers, when their work involves a lot of discretion in decision making, it's not clear which is a real emergency or not, what is the priority level, so they have a lot of discretionary decision rights. So when those 2 conditions are met, then increased scrutiny by the public can lead to negative outcomes because of like mainly the frontline professionals become very risk averse. So they want to, their job is to like sort what are the real emergencies from the non-emergencies, assign appropriate priority levels, but they try to overcompensate and assign a lot more non-emergency calls as valid emergencies. That lead to a coordination breakdown in the middle chain, and resources get locked up. So there are only finite police and ambulances. If a lot more non-emergency calls are let into the system, there is a resource allocation problem, leading to increased response time. So broadly, there is a vicious cycle of coordination that these processes trigger that leads to worsened accountability. I'll like run through the processes going on externally and internally within the organization that leads to this issue. I'll start with the external process. There are like a lot more mobile phones now, so there's increased volume of calls coming from mobile phones. But more than that, there is increased volume because people carry a phone. They notice incidents that they otherwise don't notice. So there's like an increased call volume across multiple emergency centers in the US. It's consistent. But more than just the volume, there is a lot more noise coming in the incoming information, a lot more non-emergency calls, what my informants refer to as quote-unquote bullshit calls, not my term, theirs. So what are bullshit calls? These are calls that are people, they use mobile phones to report an incident that are not really emergencies. Say they are lost somewhere downtown, they call 911 so those are the type of calls, impulse calls, non-emergencies, and so forth. And that, the first category is really increasing. There's a lot more non-emergency calls being reported, which as such is not a problem. More noise as long as the call takers are able to sort that and send that back saying, sorry, this is not a 911 level emergency. So it's not going to be a major problem. But enter social media. When the callers use social media as a way to name and shame the call takers, or sometimes they can even record all the outgoing calls and post them online, that leads to scandals unfolding about the organization or the call taker. I'll give a very quick example. So this is about a caller reporting that a kid was stung by a bee, and the protocol response was, if there's no swellings or marks, apply ice and then move on. They can't send like an EMT to that incident. And that's what the call taker said, like apply ice. And the caller got so frustrated, like threw like a barrage of swear words about the call taker, then wrote about that incident, blogged about it, tweeted it. And to my surprise, it got retweeted a lot, and many people criticizing the call taker and the organization, not the caller. So such incidents have become very common. A lot more of these incidents happen. And this is the main result, where after those incidents happen, all the orange dots you see, those are like minor incidents, which had been retweeted a lot. And then because they happen so frequently, at one point the organization needs to react, need to signal that they are like listening, they're being more accountable. So the red dot indicates organization suspending a call taker, dispatcher, to show that they are reacting. So what this essentially is, on the X is the weeks since the scandal broke out. On the Y is the average percentage of calls that a call taker categorizes as an emergency or not. On average, it is around 52 to 55%. That's the average. But then after that incident, you see like a real spike, almost moving to 78%. And then that persists for the next 14 weeks. It drops down, but to a new normal, and like it's persisting for the next almost a year. So this is the first, and I'll be happy to talk about how I operationalized a scandal in the Q&A. So this is the main first set of process that triggers a bunch of downstream consequences. And this happens only in demo, where there's multi-stage coordination. I compared it with another organization called the Zeta Emergency, which is not like a big city, but there is no multi-stage. The call taking and dispatch was done by the same person. So consequently, they can't pass the buck to the next person and expect to get away. So we don't see a similar trend in this other. And you can talk about alternate explanation. Is it due to the suspension primarily? Is it due to increased workload? I've answered that it's not. There are like other suspension events before, and that is not the primary driver of increased risk aversion. I'll be happy to talk about this too. So what happens after that? What happens when a lot more calls are let in, a lot more noise is let into the system? The dispatchers, who are in the second stage of the coordination, they need to send these things to the police officers. And so the role relations across the coordination chain get strained. There is a coordination breakdown. A lot less like fine-grained information is shared across the different parties, across call takers, dispatchers, police officers. And police officers spend a lot more time responding to these types of non-emergency calls. So the upshot is that there's like resource lockup. So there's a 24% increase in overall response time, and a 36% for higher priority emergencies, your cardiac arrest and gunshot wounds. That increased after the scandal. And the head of police talks about, they can't really get more resources. So that's the first step, reduced effectiveness. And then that leads to, once that scandal happens, when I compare the complaints received from paper as compared to social media, only 8% of the complaints through social media is reacted by the organization. They don't want to touch that because of the potential for blowback. So that's the main result, and this is the overall model. Paradox of public accountability leads to this vicious spiral of coordination that in turn worsens accountability, this spiral. And in the interest of time, I'll stop here, but I'll talk about like what the implications are and stuff. Thank you.